I never asked for much in this life. After my husband James died serving in Iraq 12 years ago, I learned to live simply. Our modest home in Oakwood Estates became my sanctuary, a place where I could raise our son Michael with the values James and I both cherished: faith, service, and quiet dignity. The neighborhood had changed over the years, growing more affluent, more concerned with appearances. But our little corner remained the same. A simple American flag flew beside our door year-round, and a cross hung in our front window. Nothing extravagant, nothing that demanded attention. The proudest day of my life came last month when Michael graduated from Marine boot camp. He stood tall in his dress blues, looking so much like his father that my heart nearly burst. He had the same determined eyes, the same strong jaw, the same unwavering commitment to something greater than himself. I could not help but think James was watching from above, beaming with the same pride that threatened to overwhelm me. When Michael had to return to base, he left me his spare dress uniform. "Display it if you want, Mom," he said with a smile. "Dad would have liked that." That evening, I carefully hung the uniform on a wooden hanger beneath our porch light, next to the flag that had never stopped flying since James was deployed for the last time. It was not about show or decoration. It was about honoring the two brave men in my life, one gone forever, one just beginning his journey. I never imagined such a simple act of love could ignite such hatred. It started 3 days later, a cream-colored envelope wedged into my door frame. Inside, a notice printed on the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association letterhead. I immediately recognized the signature at the bottom: Karen Winters, HOA President. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Karen. She had served as president for 8 years running, unopposed because no one dared challenge her authority. "Dear resident," the letter began, "it has come to our attention that non-standard decorative items have been installed on your front porch. Section 7.3 of the HOA Covenant clearly states all exterior decor must maintain uniform aesthetic standards. Your current display violates our community guidelines and must be removed within 48 hours to avoid penalties." I read the note 3 times, disbelief growing with each reading. Non-standard decorative items? I walked outside and stared at my son's uniform. This was not decoration. This was family. This was sacrifice. This was everything we believed in. The next morning, I called the HOA office and asked to speak with Karen. Her voice was crisp, efficient, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Mrs. Mitchell, I understand your son is in the military, and that is certainly commendable. However, rules exist for a reason. Your porch display creates visual clutter that impacts property values throughout Oakwood Estates." "This is not decor, Ms. Winters," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. "This is my son's Marine uniform. He just enlisted and his father died serving this country. It is a symbol of our family's sacrifice." "I understand you have personal attachments," Karen countered, her tone suggesting she understood nothing of the sort. "But personal circumstances do not exempt anyone from community standards. Perhaps you could display these items inside your home instead." When I hung up the phone, my hands were shaking. I took a deep breath and looked at the photographs on my mantle: James in his desert uniform, Michael at his graduation. I could almost hear James whispering in my ear, "Stand your ground, Sarah. Some things are worth fighting for." I had no idea that this conversation was merely the opening salvo in a war that would escalate beyond anything I could have imagined. I had no idea what Karen was truly capable of. And I had no idea how far I would go to defend my family's honor and faith when everything I held sacred came under attack. The formal violation notice arrived exactly 48 hours after Karen's warning. This one came in an official-looking envelope with "Final Notice" stamped in red across the front. Inside was a printed citation detailing my violation of Section A73, B211, and D49 of the Oakwood Estates Covenant. At the bottom, a fine: $150 for failure to maintain aesthetic harmony, and an additional $25 per day until the violation was corrected. I called the number listed for appeals and was informed the next HOA meeting would be held the following Tuesday at 7 p.m. in the community center. "You may present your case then," the secretary said, her voice carefully neutral. "The board will consider your request." For the next 5 days, I continued to display Michael's uniform and our flag. Each morning, Another notice appeared on my door, the daily fines accumulating. By Tuesday, I owed $275 to an organization that seemed determined to erase my family's sacrifice. The community center buzzed with quiet conversation when I arrived for the meeting. Familiar faces avoided my gaze as I took a seat in the back row. Karen sat at the head of a long table, flanked by 6 board members. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight bun, her posture rigid as steel. She called the meeting to order precisely at 7 p.m. "Before we address scheduled business, we have a resident appeal to consider," Karen announced, gesturing toward me without making eye contact. "Mrs. Mitchell wishes to contest violations regarding unauthorized exterior displays. You have 3 minutes to present your case." I walked to the podium, clutching photographs of Michael and James. My heart pounded, but I refused to show fear. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I have lived in Oakwood Estates for 20 years. My husband James died serving our country in Iraq. My son Michael just joined the Marines last month. The uniform on my porch belongs to him. It is not decoration. It is a symbol of service and sacrifice." As I spoke, I noticed Karen checking her watch. 2 board members whispered to each other. Only one elderly gentleman at the end of the table seemed to be listening with genuine interest. "The HOA covenant was created to maintain property values and community standards," I continued. "I understand that, but surely there is room for honoring those who serve our country. The uniform and flag represent." "Your time is up, Mrs. Mitchell," Karen interrupted, tapping her gavel lightly. "While we appreciate your family's military connections, the board must apply rules equally to all residents." She glanced around the table. "Does anyone wish to speak regarding this matter?" The elderly man raised his hand. "I think we could consider an exception in this case. After all, the covenant does not provide for exceptions based on personal circumstances," Karen cut in. "If we make one exception, we open the door to countless others. Next, someone will want to display sports memorabilia or political signs." "This is not the same thing," I protested, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. Karen's smile never reached her eyes. "Your emotional attachment to these items is understandable, Mrs. Mitchell. Perhaps your religious display in the window is already sufficient. We do allow seasonal decorations within reason, though excessive religious symbolism can make some neighbors uncomfortable." The room grew quiet. Had she just mocked my faith? The cross in my window had been there for years without complaint. "All in favor of upholding the violation?" Karen asked. 5 hands rose immediately. The elderly man and 1 other woman kept their hands down, but it did not matter. The vote was clear. As I walked to my car afterward, a neighbor named Ellen hurried to catch up with me. "I am so sorry, Sarah," she whispered. "What Karen is doing is not right, but people are afraid to speak up. She has made examples of residents who challenge her before." "What do you mean?" I asked. Ellen glanced over her shoulder nervously. "Increased inspections, nitpicking violations, even calling the city for code enforcement. The Patels had to repaint their entire house last year because Karen claimed their original color choice was too ethnic for the neighborhood." That night, I called Michael at base and told him what had happened. The line was silent for a long moment after I finished speaking. "Mom," he finally said, his voice tight with emotion, "do not let them do this. That uniform represents everything Dad stood for, everything I believe in. It is like she hates what we stand for." "I know, sweetheart," I replied, fighting back tears. "I will figure something out." The next morning, I removed the uniform from the porch and placed it on a stand in the front window, next to the cross that had become another point of contention. If the porch was off-limits, perhaps this would satisfy both the letter of the rules and honor Michael's service. It took less than 24 hours for Karen's response. Another notice, citing section C82. Window displays visible from the street must maintain neutral appearance and not create visual disruption. This was no longer about rules. This was personal, and I was beginning to understand just how far Karen Winters was willing to go. Thursday began like any other day. I left for work at the library at 7:30, locking the door behind me and taking one last glance at Michael's uniform standing proudly in the window. The morning sun caught the brass buttons, making them shine like gold. Despite everything, that sight gave me strength. My shift ended at 4 and I stopped for groceries on the way home. It was nearly 5:30 when I turned onto our street. From 2 houses away, something seemed wrong. The light hit my porch differently. Something was missing. I parked in the driveway and stepped out of the car, grocery bags still clutched in my hands. The smell hit me first, acrid, chemical, the unmistakable stench of burned fabric. My legs carried me forward even as my mind refused to process what my eyes were seeing. The uniform was gone from the window. In its place was empty space, the curtains drawn back to reveal nothing but the living room wall. But the porch, my God, the porch. A black scorch mark stained the wood where someone had clearly set something ablaze. Bits of charred blue fabric clung to the scorched planks. Small brass buttons lay scattered, blackened by fire but still recognizable. The grocery bags slipped from my fingers. Cans rolled across the driveway as I fell to my knees beside the burned patch. My fingers trembled as they touched the ashes, still warm. This had happened recently. While I was working or shopping, someone had removed Michael's uniform from inside my house and burned it on my own porch. I do not know how long I knelt there, my hands black with ash, my mind unable to form coherent thoughts beyond raw, pulsing disbelief. It was the flutter of paper that finally drew my attention, a note taped to my front door, moving gently in the breeze. The handwriting was unfamiliar, deliberately disguised in block letters. Now you match the neighborhood. Something broke inside me then. Not just grief, not just anger, but something deeper, a fundamental faith in human decency shattered like glass. This was not about rules anymore. This was hate, pure, calculated hate. I reached for my phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. I need to report a break-in and vandalism, I told the dispatcher, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Someone entered my home, stole my son's Marine uniform, and burned it on my porch. The police arrived within 20 minutes. Officer Davis, young and solemn, and Sergeant Lopez, older with kind eyes that had seen too much. They photographed the scene, collected the remains of buttons and fabric, dusted for fingerprints on the window and door. Forced entry through the back door, Sergeant Lopez noted, showing me where the lock had been jimmied. This is a serious crime, Mrs. Mitchell. Breaking and entering, destruction of property, possible hate crime elements given the targeting of military items. As the officers worked, a small crowd of neighbors gathered at the edge of my property. Ellen was there, her hand covering her mouth in horror. And then, parting the crowd like Moses through the Red Sea, came Karen Winters. "What has happened here?" she asked, her voice pitched to carry across the yard. "Is everything all right, Sarah?" The false concern in her tone made my stomach turn. Officer Davis intercepted her before she could approach too closely. "This is an active crime scene, ma'am. Please stay back." Karen's eyes surveyed the scorched porch, lingering on the ashes with an expression I can only describe as satisfaction poorly hidden behind a mask of concern. How terrible! Was anything of value taken? "My son's Marine dress uniform was stolen and burned," I replied, watching her face carefully. Something flickered across her features, not surprise, not shock, but something else. Recognition. "How awful," she said. "Though perhaps this is a form of cleansing, a fresh start to bring your property into harmony with community standards." Sergeant Lopez's head snapped up. "Excuse me, ma'am, did you just suggest this crime might be beneficial?" Karen backpedaled immediately. "Of course not. I simply meant that sometimes unfortunate events can lead to positive change. I am sure the HOA board would be willing to waive any outstanding fines given these circumstances." The officers exchanged glances. Sergeant Lopez pulled out his notepad. "I would like your full name and contact information, please." After they had questioned Karen and she had retreated to her house 3 doors down, Sergeant Lopez approached me privately. "Mrs. Mitchell, do you have any security cameras on your property?" I shook my head. "No, never needed them before." He sighed. Without witnesses or video evidence, this will be difficult to prosecute. We have the statement from the HOA president that raises suspicions, but nothing concrete connecting her to the crime. You think she did this? I asked, though in my heart I already knew. I cannot say officially, he replied, choosing his words carefully. But her comments were inappropriate at best. I would recommend installing security cameras immediately. Document everything, save any communications, and be vigilant. That night I sat alone in my living room, staring at the empty space where Michael's uniform had stood. The cross in the window remained untouched, a small mercy or perhaps an oversight. I tried to pray, tried to find comfort in faith, but the words would not come. All I could see were flames consuming fabric, honor turned to ash by hatred. How would I tell Michael? What would I say? That I had failed to protect the symbol of everything he stood for, that evil had walked into our home and destroyed it while I was gone. I picked up the phone and set it down again repeatedly, rehearsing words that could never be adequate. Around midnight, exhaustion won out over anguish, and I fell into a fitful sleep on the couch, still dressed, still smelling of smoke and tears. In my dreams, James stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder. "This is not the end," he seemed to say. "This is where you fight back." The next morning I called Michael. His silence after I told him what happened felt heavier than any words could have been. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but tight with controlled emotion. "Mom, this is a federal offense," he said. "Destroying a military uniform with malicious intent is serious, and breaking into our home, that woman has gone too far." "I cannot prove it was her," I admitted. "The police took reports but without evidence." "Then get evidence," Michael replied, his tone reminding me so much of his father. "Document everything. This is not over." After hanging up, I drove to the nearest electronics store and purchased a comprehensive security system: 4 outdoor cameras with night vision, 2 indoor cameras, and a digital video recorder. I paid extra for same-day installation. By sunset, my home had become a fortress of surveillance, every approach monitored and recorded. Next, I created a detailed log of every interaction with Karen and the HOA, dating back to the first notice. Times, dates, exact wording, everything I could remember. I printed copies of all the violation notices and fines. I photographed the burn marks on my porch and gathered what remained of Michael's uniform buttons in a small evidence bag. That weekend, I began knocking on doors. Many neighbors closed them quickly when they realized what I was asking about. But some, those who had lived under Karen's regime longer than others, invited me in and shared their stories. Ellen told me about being fined for planting non-approved flowers in her garden. The Patels described how Karen had objected to their Diwali decorations as foreign elements. Mr. Rodriguez, a Vietnam veteran, confided that Karen had complained about his service flag, calling it outdated militarism. "She targets people she considers different," Ellen explained. "People who do not fit her vision of what this neighborhood should be." On Sunday afternoon, Ellen called me, her voice hushed and excited. "Sarah, I was at the community center yesterday for a committee meeting. Karen was there early, talking to some board members. I recorded part of it on my phone. You need to hear this." We met in her kitchen, and she played the recording. Karen's voice came through clearly. "The Mitchell situation is under control. Sometimes people need to learn lessons the hard way. All this military worship and religious display, it is tacky and brings down our standards. If she thinks losing one uniform is bad, she should see what happens to people who keep fighting me." My blood ran cold. It was not a confession, but it was close, an implied threat and admission of knowledge about the uniform destruction. "May I have a copy of this?" I asked Ellen. She nodded. "I have been afraid of her for years. But what she did to you, to your son's uniform, that crosses a line no decent person should cross." That night, my new security system proved its worth. At 11:37 p.m., the alert on my phone pinged. Someone was on my property. I watched the live feed as a figure moved across my front yard, pausing to examine my porch. Even in the night vision green glow, there was no mistaking Karen Winters, clipboard in hand, inspecting the site of the fire. She spent several minutes examining the scorch marks, then took photographs with her phone. Before leaving, she placed something in my mailbox, another violation notice I would later discover, this one for property damage requiring immediate repair. The audacity stole my breath. She was documenting her own crime scene, using the damage she almost certainly caused to further harass me. I downloaded the video and added it to my growing file of evidence. The next day, I received an unexpected call from a man named David Harrison, who identified himself as the commander of the local Veterans of Foreign Wars post. "Mrs. Mitchell, word of what happened to your son's uniform has spread through the veterans community," he said. "We would like to help." I met with David and 3 other veterans that afternoon. They reviewed my evidence file with growing outrage. One of them, a retired attorney named Robert, shook his head in disbelief. "What we have here goes beyond HOA harassment," he said. "We are looking at breaking and entering, destruction of property, possibly hate crime elements given the targeting of military symbols, and potentially federal charges regarding the destruction of a military uniform." "Can we prove it was her?" I asked. Robert tapped the recording from Ellen and the security footage. "This establishes pattern, motive, and demonstrates continued harassment. It is enough to file a formal complaint and get authorities involved at a higher level than local police." "We stand with you, Mrs. Mitchell," David added. "No one attacks one of our own and gets away with it." For the first time since finding the ashes of Michael's uniform, I felt something other than grief and helplessness. I felt resolve. Karen Winters had built her kingdom on fear and intimidation, but she had never faced an opponent with nothing left to lose and powerful allies ready to fight. The war she started was about to escalate in ways she never anticipated, and this time I would be the one on the offensive. The veterans group moved with military precision. By Wednesday, Robert had drafted formal complaints to be filed with the local police department, the county prosecutor's office, and the FBI's Civil Rights Division. The document detailed everything: the escalating harassment, the break-in, the destruction of military property, Karen's documented history of targeting minorities and veterans, and the religious discrimination elements of her campaign against me. "The destruction of a military uniform with malicious intent falls under federal jurisdiction," Robert explained. "When combined with the breaking and entering, hate crime elements, and pattern of discrimination, we have a case that will draw serious attention." While the legal wheels began turning, word of what happened spread through the community and beyond. Ellen had quietly shared the story with her sister, who worked at the local news station. By Thursday morning, a reporter named Jessica Chen was on my doorstep, requesting an interview. I hesitated until David from the veterans group advised me to speak out. "Sunlight is the best disinfectant for this kind of hatred," he said. "Let people see what happened here." The interview aired on the evening news: my scorched porch, the empty space where Michael's uniform had stood, the growing memorial of flags and flowers that neighbors had begun leaving in my yard. I spoke calmly about my husband's sacrifice, my son's service, and the systematic harassment that culminated in the destruction of a sacred symbol. "This is not about HOA rules," I told Jessica. "This is about respect for military service and religious freedom. This is about standing up to bullying and hate." The story went viral overnight. By Friday morning, 3 more news outlets had called for interviews. Veterans groups from across the state pledged support. My email inbox filled with messages of encouragement from strangers who had experienced similar HOA abuses. At 9 a.m., Karen Winters was served with court papers, a restraining order preventing her from approaching my property, along with formal notice of the complaints filed against her. I was in my kitchen when I heard the commotion 3 doors down. Karen's voice carried across the neighborhood as she berated the process server. "This is absolutely ridiculous. A personal vendetta. I have done nothing wrong." By noon, an emergency HOA board meeting had been called. Unlike the previous meeting, this one was packed with residents. Karen sat at the head of the table, her usual composure cracking under pressure. Board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding eye contact with her and each other. I moved to suspend Karen Winters from her position as HOA president pending the outcome of these serious allegations, said the elderly gentleman who had tried to defend me at the previous meeting. The reputation of our community is at stake. You cannot do that, Karen snapped. I have served this community faithfully for 8 years. The vote is 6-1 for immediate suspension, the gentleman replied, as hands rose around the table. Your own board no longer trusts your leadership. Karen stormed out, but not before pointing at me with a shaking finger. You will regret this campaign of lies. All of you will. That evening my phone rang. It was Michael. Mom, I have been granted emergency leave. I will be home tomorrow. When his taxi pulled up the next day, I barely recognized my son. In just weeks, the Marines had transformed him even further, his posture straighter, his jaw firmer, his eyes somehow older. But when he hugged me, he was still my boy. Together, we stood on the porch, looking down at the scorch marks that remained despite my best cleaning efforts. Michael knelt and touched the darkened wood, his fingers tracing the outline of where his uniform had burned. I am not angry about the uniform, Mom, he said quietly. They can issue me another one. I am angry that someone tried to burn what it represents: service, sacrifice, honor. News cameras captured our quiet vigil that evening, mother and son standing on a scorched porch, flanked by veterans who had come to show solidarity. We lit a single candle and placed it where the uniform had hung. No speeches, no dramatics, just silent dignity in the face of hatred. The image appeared on the front page of the Sunday paper under the headline, Community Rallies Behind Gold Star Family After Hate Crime. Karen's world was beginning to crumble, and justice was finally within reach. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks after the burning of Michael's uniform. The courtroom was packed, media in the gallery, neighbors filling the benches, veterans standing along the back wall in silent support. Karen entered with her attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who radiated confidence. She had styled herself as the picture of suburban respectability, conservative dress, pearls at her neck, hair perfectly arranged. But her eyes betrayed her, darting nervously around the room. The prosecutor, a no-nonsense woman named Maria Gonzalez, laid out the state's case methodically. Your Honor, the evidence will show that the defendant engaged in a systematic campaign of harassment against Sarah Mitchell, based on religious and military bias, culminating in breaking and entering, destruction of property, and violation of federal statutes regarding military uniforms. Karen's attorney countered with indignation. My client is a respected community leader being subjected to a witch hunt based on circumstantial evidence and community gossip. There is no proof connecting her to any crime. But then the evidence began to mount. The HOA notices establishing pattern and escalation. Ellen's audio recording of Karen mocking my faith and military worship. The security footage showing Karen examining the burn site in the middle of the night. Testimony from neighbors about her history of targeting certain residents. Most damaging was the forensic evidence. Police had found traces of accelerant matching a specific brand of lighter fluid on the scorch marks. When they executed a search warrant on Karen's garage, they found the same brand, with Karen's fingerprints on the bottle and traces of blue fabric fibers stuck to the nozzle. Karen took the stand in her own defense, a decision her attorney clearly advised against based on his pained expression. She portrayed herself as a dedicated volunteer being persecuted for upholding community standards. Yes, I enforce the rules, she testified, her voice quivering with self-righteousness. That is my job as HOA president, but I would never destroy property or enter someone's home illegally. Maria Gonzalez approached for cross-examination. Ms. Winters, can you explain why your fingerprints were found on a bottle of lighter fluid containing fabric fibers matching the burned uniform? I used that lighter fluid for my grill, Karen stammered. The fiber evidence must be contaminated. And can you explain this text message sent from your phone to board member Thomas Wilson on the day of the incident? Maria held up an evidence document. It reads, Problem solved. Mitchell display has been permanently addressed. No need for further action. Karen's face drained of color. Her attorney requested a recess, but the damage was done. When court resumed, Karen's defense had shifted from denial to diminished capacity, claims of stress, anxiety medication, and temporary poor judgment. The judge was unmoved. The evidence presented demonstrates not a momentary lapse in judgment, but a calculated pattern of discrimination and harassment culminating in serious criminal acts. The verdict came swiftly, guilty on all counts. Karen was sentenced to 18 months, most suspended in favor of 5 years probation, mandatory community service with veterans organizations, and psychological evaluation. She was ordered to pay restitution for the destroyed uniform and property damage, plus additional punitive damages. Most significantly, she was permanently barred from serving on any HOA board or community leadership position, and a restraining order would prevent her from approaching within 500 feet of my property or contacting me in any way. As the gavel fell, Karen sat motionless, her carefully constructed world of control and power shattered completely. When she finally rose, she refused to look at anyone, her eyes fixed on the floor as officers escorted her out. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered around Michael and me. "Mrs. Mitchell, how do you feel about the verdict?" Jessica Chen asked. "This was never about revenge," I replied honestly. "It was about standing up to bullying and hatred. It was about saying that some things, faith, service, sacrifice, deserve respect, not persecution." Michael stood tall beside me, his hand on my shoulder. "My mother taught me to fight for what is right, not what is easy," he added. "That is why I joined the Marines. That is why we stood our ground here." As cameras flashed, a group of veterans approached, led by David. "Mrs. Mitchell, we have something for you," he said, presenting a folded package wrapped in tissue paper. Inside was a new Marine dress blue uniform, identical to the one that had been destroyed, with Michael's name and rank embroidered above the pocket. The veterans had commissioned it specially. "No one can burn away honor," David said simply. "No one can destroy what these uniforms represent." For the first time in weeks, I wept openly, not from pain or anger, but from the overwhelming knowledge that hatred had not won. That for every Karen in the world, there were countless others willing to stand for what was right. The "for sale" sign appeared in front of Karen's house 3 days after the verdict. Moving trucks came the following weekend. She left without saying goodbye to anyone, slipping away in the pre-dawn hours like a thief, fitting, given her crimes. The HOA board, now led by the elderly gentleman who had first shown me kindness, called an emergency community meeting. Nearly every household attended, filling the community center to capacity. The mood was somber but hopeful, like a town gathering after a storm has passed. "What happened in our community is a stain on all of us," the new president began. "Not because we were all complicit, but because many of us remained silent when we should have spoken up. Today, we begin the process of rebuilding not just our governance, but our common bonds as neighbors." The board unanimously voted to revise the HOA bylaws. New rules were established to prevent concentration of power, requiring regular rotation of leadership positions. A community oversight committee would review all violation notices before they were issued. Most significantly, explicit protections were added for displays of religious, cultural, and military significance. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened. Neighbors who had barely spoken before began reaching out to one another. The Rodriguez family hosted a barbecue for the entire street. The Patels invited everyone to their Diwali celebration. Ellen organized a community garden in the vacant lot at the corner, where people of all backgrounds worked side by side planting vegetables and flowers. Michael had to return to his unit, but before he left, we organized a small ceremony on our front lawn. We invited the veterans who had supported us, neighbors who had stood with us, and even those who had remained silent but now sought reconciliation. Under the soft glow of early evening, Michael stood on our porch, the scorch marks now covered by a beautiful handcrafted wooden platform built by Mr. Rodriguez and his sons. He spoke without notes, his voice steady and clear. When I joined the Marines, I took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. What happened here reminded me that the values we fight for overseas must also be protected at home. Freedom of religion, respect for service, the right to live without intimidation or fear. He paused, looking out at the gathered crowd. But this experience also taught me something even more important, that when good people find the courage to stand together, hatred cannot prevail. My mother stood alone at first, but she did not remain alone for long, and that gives me hope for the country I have sworn to defend. After the ceremony, as neighbors mingled on our lawn sharing food and stories, David approached me with a large package. "This came from Marine headquarters," he explained. "Apparently your story reached some important ears." Inside was a Marine dress blue uniform, perfectly tailored, with a letter of commendation from the Commandant of the Marine Corps himself, acknowledging the disrespect shown to the uniform and affirming the Corps support for families like ours. The next morning, with Michael's blessing, I hung this new uniform on our porch, in the exact spot where the original had been displayed and later burned. Not as an act of defiance this time, but as a symbol of restoration, of principles upheld, of wrongs righted, of faith in human decency restored. The uniform still hangs there today, joined now by symbols from other neighbors. The Patel's beautiful lantern, Ellen's handcrafted wreath, Mr. Rodriguez's service flag. Our street has become a tapestry of diverse expressions, each respected, each contributing to a richer whole. Karen's former house sold quickly. The new owners, a young interracial couple with 2 small children, were welcomed with home-cooked meals and genuine smiles. They told me they had heard about the incident before moving in but were reassured by how the community had transformed in its aftermath. Sometimes in the quiet evenings, I sit on my porch and reflect on everything that happened. The pain and violation I felt watching Michael's uniform burn to ashes. The righteous anger that fueled my fight for justice. The unexpected allies who emerged when I needed them most. Most of all, I think about what James would say if he could see us now. I like to think he would be proud, not just of Michael following in his footsteps of service, but of me for finding the strength to stand against hatred when it would have been easier to surrender. Faith, like honor, cannot be destroyed by fire. Sometimes it is in the ashes of what we lose that we find the seeds of something greater, a community reborn, a wrong made right, and the quiet triumph of dignity over hate.